The sun had barely crested the ridge of the Appalachian foothills when Linda Carver stood barefoot on the wooden floorboards of the mountain chapel, her white silk robe tied loosely at the waist. Outside, a soft mist clung to the trees, the kind that made everything feel more distant and dreamlike. Inside, the air smelled of old pine and fresh flowers. She ran her fingers along the edge of the vanity table in the bridal dressing room, a space converted from what used to be the chapel's choir loft. A mirror surrounded by faded bulbs flickered slightly as she studied her reflection. Auburn curls pulled into an elegant updo, blue eyes lined with a trace of silver, lips tinted in rose. A knock at the door. "Linda?" It was Amanda, her best friend and maid of honor. "We're heading to breakfast. You want us to bring anything back?" Linda turned toward the door but didn't open it. "No, I'm good," she called through. "I'll stay and get ready. Take your time." "You sure?" "I'm sure." They left in a chorus of heels clicking against tile and light laughter. Linda was alone. This should have been the happiest morning of her life. In just a few hours, she would walk down the aisle toward Thomas Avery, the quiet man who had loved her for 5 years. They'd met when she was a freelance photographer and he was a local high school teacher. He was steady, kind, and he had that rare quality of listening like nothing else in the world existed. But as Linda turned back to the mirror, something in her expression shifted. Her smile faded. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a pearl earring. She paused, listening. She thought she heard footsteps, but the hallway was silent. She exhaled, trying to laugh it off. It was probably just old wood creaking, or nerves. Still, she stood frozen, staring at the closed dressing room door. She didn't know it then, but no one would see her alive again. Hours later, Amanda returned first. She was carrying a paper bag with coffee cups and croissants, chatting about how perfect the weather had turned out. But the moment she opened the dressing room door, her voice caught in her throat. "Linda?" The room was empty. Linda's wedding dress was still draped over the mannequin. Her shoes were placed neatly beside the vanity. The curling iron was still warm. The croissant bag hit the floor. By the time the other bridesmaids arrived, the atmosphere had shifted from confusion to panic. They called her name, checked the bathroom, the chapel, the gravel parking lot, the woods surrounding the property. Nothing. Thomas was told, and his face turned an unnatural shade of gray. He didn't cry, not yet. He simply started walking, into the trees, past the chapel, calling her name over and over. The search begins. Sheriff Ray Mott arrived 45 minutes later with 2 deputies. He was a man nearing retirement, more used to handling petty thefts and the occasional drunk driver than a missing bride. Still, he took it seriously. "No signs of struggle," he muttered, walking through the dressing room with his wide belt creaking at every step. "No broken windows, no footprints out back." "Could she have run?" asked one of the deputies, a young man barely old enough to shave. "Run," Amanda barked. "Have you seen her? She was glowing this morning, giddy. She would never just walk away." But theories began to form anyway. Maybe she'd gotten cold feet. Maybe someone had picked her up. Maybe she'd been overwhelmed, but her purse was still there. Her keys, her coat, and the back entrance to the chapel, locked from the inside. The forest was searched. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the ridge lines for days. No sign of Linda. Whispers in town. The town of Minter Ridge was small, population 4,200. A community where everybody knew everybody, and gossip traveled faster than facts. By the 3rd day, some began to point fingers. "Tom always seemed intense," whispered a woman at the diner. "She was too pretty to marry someone like him. Maybe she wanted out," someone else offered. Then the tabloids arrived. "Runaway bride," screamed one headline. "Mountain wedding mystery," screamed another. Tom stopped leaving his house. Linda's parents, devastated, moved away within the year. No one could explain it. One moment she was there, the next, gone. No note, no witnesses, not even a footprint. It was as if the chapel itself had swallowed her. 13 years later, the same chapel. In the summer of 1999, The mountain chapel had long since fallen into disuse. The congregation had moved into a modern building down in town, and the old wooden structure had become a home for raccoons and moss. No one had held a service there in almost a decade, but a local historical society decided to restore the place, to preserve it as a wedding venue. Volunteers showed up with hammers and pry bars, peeling away decades of dust and warped paneling. That's when they found it. Behind a section of wall in the bridal dressing room, a worker's crowbar hit something soft. At first he thought it was insulation, but then he saw the lace. He called out to his partner. They carefully pried away the wall boards, and what emerged was a crushed bundle of ivory satin and delicate beadwork. A wedding dress, stained with dark brown and reddish streaks. Someone screamed. Police were called. The forensics team arrived 3 hours later. The dress was carefully bagged, along with strands of hair and what appeared to be human tissue embedded in the silk. There was something else. The space had clearly been sealed from the inside. There was no external latch, no opening. Only one conclusion remained. Someone had been alive in there when the wall went up. DNA. The tests came back a week later. The blood on the dress matched Linda Carver. The story exploded across the state. Local news ran retrospectives. National media revisited the disappearance. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did no one hear her? Why was the wall sealed? Who did it? And most chilling of all, was Linda still alive when they left the chapel that day? The chapel was silent. The dust that floated through the cracked stained glass windows seemed heavier than air, almost mournful. 13 years had passed since Linda Carver's name had last been spoken aloud within those walls, not in prayer, not in joy, and certainly not in justice. Now her name was everywhere again. 1986, the days after. In the immediate days following Linda's vanishing, everything descended into chaos. Detectives swarmed the chapel, questioning the bridesmaids over and over. They combed through their alibis, questioned the kitchen staff at the nearby lodge, the delivery driver who brought flowers that morning, the groundskeeper who left early with a headache. No stone was left unturned, at first. Linda's parents, George and Clara Carver, were inconsolable. George, a stoic retired Navy captain, broke down on camera during a press conference, pleading with the public, "If someone has her, please, just let her come home." But there was no call, no ransom, no sightings. No one had her. She was simply gone. Suspicions. Take root. Root. When a person vanishes so cleanly, leaving behind a dress, a warm curling iron, but no witnesses, the mind naturally turns inward. Blame started creeping in like rot behind wallpaper. The bridesmaids were first. Amanda Thompson, the maid of honor, was questioned a dozen times. "You're the last to see her alive," the sheriff had said, voice gentle but firm. "Did she seem upset? Did she mention anything unusual?" Amanda shook her head each time. She was happy, a little nervous maybe, but excited. She was glowing. Tom Avery didn't fare much better. The public began whispering. The word groom always carried an implied weight in these cases. Avery was polite, cooperative, but hollow-eyed. He had no alibi other than being in his cabin down the trail with his brother Jeremy, waiting for the ceremony. Still, his life began to unravel. His students stopped showing up for extra tutoring. Someone spray-painted killer on his mailbox. Once, a brick shattered his living room window. In the public mind, someone had to be guilty. The case goes cold. By early 1987, the investigation slowed. No new evidence, no body, no leads. The sheriff's office quietly reclassified the case as a cold missing person, the kind that gets reviewed once a year but rarely reactivated. Tom moved away, eventually settling into a small home near the state border. He stopped speaking to reporters, friends, even Amanda. Linda's parents moved to Florida. Their home in Minter Ridge sat unsold for 5 years before being bulldozed by developers. Time did what it always does. It buried the story under layers of new ones. By 1990, few even remembered Linda Carver had existed. But Tom never forgot. 1999, after the dress. The moment the forensics confirmed it, that the blood on the crumpled dress matched Linda's DNA, the world around Tom shifted back into motion. He was at work, teaching 10th grade literature in a modest school in Rose Hill, when the sheriff from Minter Ridge called. "We've found something," the man had said. Tom dropped the phone. The media frenzy reignited overnight. News trucks parked outside the old chapel. Camera drones buzzed above the roof. Anchors used phrases like "cold case breakthrough" and "bride entombed in her own dressing room." The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why was the space sealed from the inside? Had she crawled in there herself? Was she hiding? Or had someone trapped her there and somehow, impossibly, escaped without leaving a trace? Autopsy without a body. The forensic team had so little to work with. Blood, a few strands of hair, a single fingernail embedded in the silk hem. But what they found chilled the blood of even seasoned detectives. There were signs of physical struggle, deep scratch marks on the inside panel of the wooden cavity, skin cells under the nail. Part of the dress was shredded from the inside out, but no skeleton, no remains, only a cavity just wide enough to hold a person curled tightly into themselves, hidden behind decorative paneling in the far corner of the bridal suite. It made no sense. If someone had sealed her in there, they had to have done so fast, quietly, and with a level of premeditation that bordered on surgical. Amanda returns. Amanda hadn't spoken publicly about Linda in over a decade. She now lived in Oregon, married with 2 children. But when she saw the news, she booked a flight the same day. She met Tom at a small cafe in Minter Ridge. He looked older, grayer, but so did she. "I never believed you did it," she said, setting her hands flat on the table. "Not for a second." Tom nodded. "Thank you." They didn't speak for a few moments. Then Amanda said something strange. "I keep thinking about that morning, about something she said to me before we left." "What?" "She asked if there was a way to lock the dressing room from the inside." Tom's breath caught. "She said it like a joke," Amanda continued, "like maybe she didn't want anyone to see the dress before the ceremony. But now it feels different, like maybe she was afraid." The pastor's notes. Detectives soon uncovered another clue, one no one had thought to check back in 1986, the handwritten journals of Pastor Raymond Klein, who had been scheduled to officiate Linda's wedding. He had died in 1994, but his wife had kept his records intact. They were mostly unremarkable: sermons, baptisms, marriage counseling sessions, until one entry, dated June 17, 1986, the morning after Linda disappeared. "The wedding never happened. The bride vanished. The groom broke. I offered him prayer, but he would not take it. I fear something darker lingers here than anyone suspects. I heard noises in the walls again last night." No one had taken the pastor seriously when he tried to explain it. The chapel was old. Wood expands and shifts. Mice get into crawl spaces. But what if it hadn't been wood or rodents? What if Linda had still been alive, screaming behind the walls, and no one had listened? Tom's dream. That night, Tom had the dream again. He was standing at the altar. The pews were empty. The candles flickered in time with his heartbeat. The wind outside howled like it was trying to say something through the cracks. And then, from the back of the chapel, he saw her. Linda. Wearing the same dress. Only the hem was soaked in dark red, and her eyes were wide with terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but only dust poured out. He woke up screaming. Theories multiply. Online forums exploded with speculation. Theory 1. Linda ran away, came back later to hide, and somehow accidentally sealed herself in, and no one noticed her missing a second time. Theory 2. She was murdered and hidden by someone who had access to the chapel, someone trusted who knew the layout intimately. Theory 3. The most terrifying, that she had been alive when the wedding began, that she screamed while the guests laughed and the music played, that no one heard because no one listened. The last theory haunted Tom the most, because part of him believed it. The world moved on. except for the few who couldn't. From 1986 to 1999, 13 long years passed in Minter Ridge, each one pressing down like a stone on the unmarked grave of a bride no one could bury. To the town, Linda Carver became a ghost story. To Thomas Avery, she never stopped being real. The first year, echoes and accusation. In the weeks following Linda's disappearance, Thomas barely slept. He walked the chapel trail daily, retracing the steps they had taken together during happier times, the oak tree where she carved their initials, the bench where he proposed, the field where she once chased fireflies in her dress heels, laughing like she had nothing left to lose. He returned to the dressing room too, always alone, always quiet. The smell of her perfume lingered longer than it should have, that soft lilac blend she mixed herself. He would close his eyes and swear she was standing right behind him. But people began whispering. Everywhere he went, the hardware store, the market, even church. Maybe he snapped. Maybe she told him she changed her mind. He was always quiet. Those are the ones you worry about. Deputy Harlan Cross, the youngest officer on the investigation team, had taken a personal interest in the case. Too personal, some said. He showed up to Tom's house without a warrant, asked strange accusatory questions, pressured him to just be honest. Tom answered the same way every time. I don't know what happened. I don't. And it was true, which made it worse. Amanda's silence. Amanda, Linda's best friend and maid of honor, left town a month after the failed wedding. She said she couldn't stay. Everything reminded her of Linda. The salon where they did their trial hairstyles, the diner where they practiced her wedding toast, the overlook where they once swore they'd never let a man come between them. Amanda wrote letters at first, sent one every week for 6 months to Tom. He didn't respond. Eventually she stopped writing. Neither of them knew what to say anymore. 1988 to 1994, Decay. The chapel closed for good in early 1988. Pastor Klein, already in declining health, said he felt a darkness had settled in the building. It groans at night, he told his wife, like something wants out. No one believed him. People said it was grief or stress or dementia creeping in. The town council moved services to a new building near the elementary school. The old mountain chapel stood empty, its windows cracked, its paint peeling. Kids dared each other to break in after dark. They told stories of hearing a woman sobbing behind the walls. One boy said he saw a handprint inside the dressing room mirror. Another swore the gown still hung on its hook, even though the police had taken it as evidence. But most people forgot, and the ones who remembered kept quiet. Tom's isolation. By 1990, Tom Avery had moved to a small rental property 30 miles west near the Georgia border. He found work teaching English at a charter school. He never remarried, never even dated. The school principal described him as polite, focused, emotionally distant. His students called him Mr. Ghost. He kept a photo of Linda on his desk, the same one used for the missing person posters. She was leaning against a pine tree, smiling, hair windblown. You could see the promise of everything she was about to become in her eyes. Each year, on June 17th, the anniversary of the wedding, Tom drove back to the chapel, even after the gates were chained shut. He left a white rose on the front steps, never spoke a word. One year he found the rose still there from the year before, dried, brittle, untouched. The building had become a tomb. 1994, the pastor's last confession. Pastor Raymond Klein's death in 1994 came quietly, with no fanfare. His wife found him slumped over his journal in the study. He had written only one sentence that night. "She is still here. I know it. I hear her." His wife, distraught but practical, boxed up all his belongings and donated most to the church's archive. It wasn't until 1999, when the case re-emerged, that someone thought to read through those journals. They were filled with strange entries, voices in the floorboards, something knocking in the walls, not mice, too slow, rhythmic, like breathing. Dreamt I was officiating her funeral, woke up sweating, heard scratching again. He'd tried to tell people, but no one had wanted to listen. Amanda's return to memory. By the late 90s, Amanda was living in Oregon. She had 2 daughters, a dog, a stable life, but every so often she would dream of the chapel, of Linda's laughter echoing down the hall. Then the laughter would turn into screaming, muffled, pounding, desperate. She'd wake up, gasping. Her husband once asked her, "Why don't you talk about that day, about her?" Amanda couldn't explain it. There was something shameful in her silence, like she'd missed something, like she could have stopped it, like she'd been part of the vanishing, just by walking away when Linda had asked for that extra moment alone. She kept that guilt folded into her memory, like a pressed flower in a Bible. And then, in June of 1999, she turned on the news and saw the dress. The wall, the cavity where Linda's dress was found, had been concealed behind decorative paneling in the far right corner of the dressing room. Originally designed as a storage alcove during the 1930s renovation, it was repurposed as a cosmetic fixture in the 1970s, hidden behind cosmetic wood slats nailed into the beams. The forensic investigators confirmed it. The nails had been driven from the inside. More chillingly, the space had no lock, no latch, no opening mechanism. It was not a closet, not a secret passage. It was a trap. And someone, either Linda or someone with her, had closed it shut forever. What could she have known? Amanda met with investigators in mid-July, hoping to help. She mentioned something she had never told anyone before. Linda was anxious, not panicked, not upset, but watchful, she said. She kept checking the mirror behind her. She asked me if there were any crawl spaces. I laughed, told her this wasn't a horror movie. Did she say why she was asking? She said, "I think someone was in here last night." The words hung heavy in the interview room. Amanda began to cry. "I thought it was nerves. I should have stayed with her. I should have—" The detective paused. "Last night?" "Yes. New leads, old fears." With renewed energy, investigators focused on the 24-hour period before the wedding. They found maintenance logs indicating that one man had been in the chapel late that night, replacing a faulty breaker in the dressing room ceiling. His name was Franklin Rowe, a retired electrician. No criminal record, no complaints. But when police tried to reach him, they found he had passed away in 1994, the same year as Pastor Klein. His records were incomplete. No family, no surviving friends, except for one, a former janitor named Clyde Bell. When questioned, Clyde remembered Franklin well. "Quiet guy, real precise, didn't say much, but I always got a weird vibe." "Like what?" Clyde hesitated. "He used to talk about how churches weren't as holy as people think, said buildings remember things, and sometimes people can disappear inside them." The investigators looked at each other. Had someone built a prison and left Linda inside it? The journal. Nobody wanted to read. The team found one final object, a notebook, sealed in plastic, buried in a file box from the 1986 investigation. It had been dismissed at the time, just a tattered journal recovered from the dressing room. No fingerprints, just water-damaged pages. But on closer inspection, the handwriting matched Linda's. On the count-to-last page, "If something happens to me, it was not an accident. Someone has been watching me. Inside this chapel. I know it. I don't feel safe here." The last page was stained in what forensics later confirmed was blood. The final incomplete sentence read, "He said I'd make a perfect bride forever." Minter Ridge had always been a quiet town, a place where people believed in Sunday service, trusted their neighbors, and locked their doors more out of habit than necessity. But after the bridal dress was found in the wall of the chapel, the town's silence began to feel like something darker, like a conspiracy sealed in timber and dust. And now, all eyes were on a name most had forgotten: Franklin Rowe, the electrician who vanished from memory. Before he was just a name in a repair log, Franklin Rowe was one of those people who hovered on the edges of memory, the kind of man you recognized by his faded blue overalls and quiet voice, but whose full name you'd never known. He did odd jobs for the town throughout the 70s and 80s, rewiring basement panels, replacing chapel bulbs, restoring the old circuit box that powered the stained glass backlighting. His last logged job, June 16th, 1986, 11:45 p.m., chapel breaker malfunction, fixed dressing room lighting. It was the night before Linda's wedding. That repair order was dismissed at the time. What mattered more back then were the missing bride, the distraught groom, and the lack of a body. But in 1999, it became the most chilling timestamp in the entire case. An unsettling visit. Detective Leah Hart had joined the cold case unit just 2 months before the dress was discovered. She was sharp, methodical, a former military intelligence analyst, and she didn't believe in ghosts, but something about this case made her skin itch. She tracked down the last known residence of Franklin Rowe, a crumbling A-frame cabin in the woods just outside Minter Ridge, boarded up since 1995. Accompanied by a deputy and a crime scene tech, she entered the property. Dust coated every surface. Tools hung neatly on rusting nails. A wall calendar still sat on July 1986, its corners curled, untouched since the month after Linda vanished. But the strangest thing was the crawl space. Behind a bookcase in the back hallway, they found a narrow panel, pried loose. Inside was a crawl tunnel, barely wide enough for a man to fit through, leading into the attic. It was filled with drawings, hundreds of them, sketches of the chapel floor plan, close-up portraits of a woman in a bridal dress, crude renderings of a man watching from above, the ceiling panels drawn like jail bars. Some were signed, some dated. The last one? June 17th, 1986. Who was Franklin Rowe? They dug into Franklin's past. He was born in Minter Ridge in 1940, lived a quiet life. No marriage, no kids. Parents died early. He'd been in and out of state hospitals between 1961 and 1968 for what records described as paranoid schizophrenia, voyeuristic compulsion, and delusional religiosity. After that, he disappeared from mental health records, either deemed functionally harmless or lost in the paperwork. But here's the part no one had noticed. Franklin had once worked at the chapel full-time, not just as an electrician, but as a part-time custodian and assistant to Pastor Klein. He had keys to every room. He had access to every blueprint, and according to an old maintenance memo from 1984, he'd requested permission to personally inspect and reinforce the dressing room ceiling due to minor sagging in the support beam. Permission was granted. No one ever followed up. The ceiling panels. The forensic team returned to the chapel for another sweep. This time, they focused on the ceiling of the bridal dressing room, and what they found changed everything. Behind one of the wooden slats in the ceiling, wedged between insulation and rotting wood, they discovered a camera lens. Not connected to anything modern, it was part of an ancient homemade film rig, long since dead, but it had once pointed directly down toward the mirror where Linda stood to do her makeup. More chillingly, behind another panel was a small compartment, padded with blankets, empty food wrappers, and a narrow viewing slit cut into the decorative molding. The space was big enough for a man to lie flat, silently, above the bridal suite. Watching, awaiting. Theories take shape. By late August of 1999, the working theory among investigators was terrifying. Franklin Rowe had used his access and repair jobs as cover. He had modified the ceiling over time, perhaps years, constructing a space where he could hide and observe the women who used the dressing room. Linda had been the final one. Had she discovered the peephole? Had she heard something the night before? Was that why she asked Amanda if the room could be locked from the inside? And most chilling of all, had Franklin been in the ceiling the entire time her bridesmaids were away at breakfast? The scratch marks. New forensic analysis on the paneling removed from the cavity where the dress was found revealed something horrifying. There were 2 sets of DNA beneath the fingernail embedded in the fabric. One belonged to Linda, the other did not. It matched no one in the national database, but it also didn't match Tom, Amanda, or anyone in the bridal party. Detectives believed Linda had scratched and clawed at the wall in her final moments, and someone, likely Franklin, had been right there with her. There were also blood smears high on the wall interior, suggesting a struggle, and that Linda had been lifted or held upright against the paneling. Tom's collapse. Tom Avery was never officially cleared in 1986, only quietly forgotten. But in September 1999, after the crawlspace discovery hit the news, the sheriff's office formally declared him not a suspect. Still, it broke him again. He gave a rare interview to a local paper. "I loved her," he said. "She wasn't just the woman I was going to marry. She was the part of me that believed life could be better than the past. And I left her alone." When asked what he thought happened that morning, he stared into the recorder and said, "She was scared, and we didn't listen, and something inside that chapel was waiting for her." The reporter noted that his hands were trembling the entire time. Amanda's memory returns. Shortly after the attic drawings were revealed, Amanda had a memory, one she'd buried for years. She remembered walking back toward the dressing room just before breakfast, just for a second, because she'd forgotten her lipstick, and hearing a creak above her. She looked up and saw nothing but ceiling. She assumed it was the old wood, but now, she realized, it came from directly above the dressing room mirror, right where the man had been hiding, and that meant Franklin was already up there, watching them. The final entry. Among Franklin Rowe's attic journals, investigators found a torn scrap of yellowed paper wedged into the binding of his last sketchbook. Scrawled in black pencil, "She saw me, she knows, but it's okay. I can make her stay. She'll be mine forever, a perfect bride. They'll never find her. I'll hide her in the wall like a promise." The page was dated June 17th, 1986. Sealed from the inside. There remains one question no one has fully answered. How was the panel sealed from the inside? The forensic team now believes Franklin Rowe entered the cavity with Linda, subdued her, then used a bracing pole and pre-positioned hardware to nail the paneling shut from within, using pressure and leverage. Once sealed, he would have been trapped alongside her, in total darkness. Investigators believe he either died inside or found a way out through the chapel's crawl network before sealing the final layer himself. The space was too tight for two people. One would have succumbed quickly. Only the dress, blood, and fingernail remained. Rowe's body was never found. The chapel reopened in October 1999. The renovations were finished. The stained glass gleamed again. The walls had been sealed, scrubbed, repainted. The blood-stained dress had long since been taken into evidence, the cavity where it was found now covered with fresh paneling and a mounted cross. But something wasn't right. The air felt off. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was something colder, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And then, people started hearing her. A wedding that never finished. The first incident came from a florist. She was arranging white lilies on the altar for a small wedding. As she worked, she swore she heard humming, a faint, breathy tune, like someone singing to themselves. She paused, looked up. The church was empty. Then she noticed something stranger. On the floor near the mirror of the bridal dressing room, where Linda had last stood, a single white lily lay wilting, though she hadn't put any flowers there yet. It hadn't come from her arrangement. And the humming? It had stopped the moment she opened the door, the pastor's secret recordings. Pastor Elijah Moon had only recently taken over the chapel. He wasn't from Minter Ridge and knew little of the tragedy, just what the congregation whispered. He didn't like gossip. He believed in redemption, not ghosts. But after 3 separate brides reported a woman whispering in the dressing room mirror, he grew uneasy. He installed a voice-activated recorder under the vanity, thinking it was pranksters or echoing pipes. The first night, it was silent. The second night, around 3:12 a.m., it activated. The recording was faint, muffled, but when amplified, 2 words became unmistakably clear. "Help me." The pastor never told anyone. He erased the file. He removed the recorder, and then he stopped entering the room entirely. Amanda returns. Amanda hadn't been back to Minter Ridge since the funeral service in '86. But after hearing about the eerie events, she returned quietly, unannounced. She visited the chapel alone. She brought white roses. At first, she just stood in the doorway of the dressing room. She couldn't step past the threshold. But then, with a deep breath, she did. The room looked nothing like it had back then. New paint, new furniture, even a new mirror. But the silence felt the same. She knelt in front of the panel where the dress had been found. And that's when she saw it, scratched faintly into the molding. A name. Linda. Not carved by a tool, scratched by a fingernail. The return of the whisperer. After Amanda's visit, reports escalated. 2 altar boys refused to enter the rear hallway, claiming they saw a woman in white near the confessional who vanished when they called out. The organist, Mrs. Castor, a devout woman in her 60s, fainted during service, and later told her daughter that while playing, she'd seen a face in the balcony watching her with blood down the side of its mouth. But perhaps the most chilling report came from a teenage girl who'd come to try on her wedding dress in the mirror. She was alone, taking photos for her friends. Later, when she looked at the photos, in 3 of them, a pale hand could be seen in the mirror, hovering over her shoulder. In one, a faint outline of a face, not hers, reflected behind her. She fainted. Her mother called the police, but the footage mysteriously failed to upload to her computer. The files were corrupted. The phone died and never turned back on. Detective Hart's return. Lee Hart had left the case after the discovery of the attic drawings. She thought it was over, but then she received a call from Amanda. "She's not at rest," Amanda said. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Reluctantly, Hart returned to Minter Ridge and arranged one final inspection of the chapel. She and Amanda entered the dressing room together, flashlights in hand. They reopened the panel. The inside had been cleaned, but at the bottom, tucked into a crack of wood, was a thin strip of paper. It was old, yellowed, torn on both ends. The writing was faded, but legible. "I can't breathe." They sent the paper to the lab. It matched the same notebook paper type as Franklin Rowe's journals. But the handwriting? It didn't match his. It was a woman's. The dream that wouldn't let go. That night, Amanda had a dream. She was back in the chapel, dressed in her bridesmaid gown. Linda stood at the mirror, but something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't matching her movements. Linda turned to Amanda, her face pale, lips trembling. She whispered, "You left me." And then she was pulled, violently, and into the mirror by a hand Amanda couldn't see. Amanda woke up screaming. The dream happened 3 nights in a row. Bond another cavity. Leah requested full permission to conduct one final structural scan of the chapel walls. The owners, now desperate to shake the building's growing reputation, agreed. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team swept the entire rear half of the chapel. They found another hollow space, this one in the floorboards beneath the pulpit. It was small, roughly coffin-sized, and inside they found bones. They belonged to a male, aged 40-50. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Dental records confirmed it. Franklin Rowe. 1 victim, 1 killer, 1 tomb. The story, it seemed, had come full circle. Rowe had taken Linda, lured her or forced her into the wall cavity. But at some point, something had gone wrong. Perhaps she fought back. Perhaps she wounded him. Maybe he tried to reseal the panel, but she attacked. What is now suspected, he locked her in, but somehow, someone turned on him. He was killed with a blunt object, possibly a ceremonial candlestick, and buried under the floor, hidden where no one would look. But if so, by whom? There were no fingerprints, no witnesses. The true terror. The chapel was officially closed in late October 1999, again, this time for good, but not before one last visitor came. A custodian had returned to retrieve his belongings. He entered the dressing room to grab his radio. When he came out, he was white as a sheet. He said he saw a woman standing at the mirror. Not in the reflection. In the glass. Not moving. Just watching him. When he turned away, he swore he heard her say, "You weren't supposed to leave me." The chapel had been sealed for good. The floor cavity beneath the pulpit, where Franklin Rowe's remains were found, was permanently bricked over. The dressing room mirror was shattered, the congregation disbanded, but the mystery refused to die, because just when everyone thought the story was over, someone found a photograph, a single image, from that day in 1986, and it changed everything. The forgotten camera. Clara Reyes had been 15 when Linda Carver vanished. Her mother had catered the wedding breakfast, and Clara had tagged along with her Polaroid camera, snapping candids of guests arriving, flowers being arranged, bridesmaids laughing on the lawn. She never developed half the photos. After the disappearance, her mom forbade her from talking about it, said it was God's will, not gossip. But in 2000, while cleaning out her late mother's attic, Clara found an old shoebox. Inside, among school papers and postcards, were several undeveloped Polaroid cartridges. One of them was labeled in faded pen, June 17, 1986, LC Wedding. She almost threw them out, but something told her not to. She took them to a photo restoration lab in Asheville. What came back haunted her. The photograph. One photo, grainy but clear, showed the chapel steps from a distance, early morning, slightly before 9 a.m. In the center, Amanda, holding a coffee cup. To her left, a bridesmaid adjusting her shoe, and behind them, in the shadow of the doorway, barely visible, a pale figure in white, standing just inside the dressing room entrance. Her face was turned toward the hallway, as if she'd just heard something. She was alone. It was Linda. But Clara didn't care about the bride. She noticed something else. A shape, a dark, hunched silhouette in the upper right corner, peeking from behind the edge of the hallway, watching Linda. Too tall to be a child, too bulky for Amanda, and the shape wasn't wearing white. Hart's analysis. Detective Leah Hart flew to Asheville within 48 hours of Clara's call. She examined the photo. Digitally enhanced, the image revealed a man, short brown hair, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like coveralls or a workman's uniform. His face was slightly turned, just enough to make out a smile, not warm, not friendly, expectant. Hart compared the posture, build, and uniform to old photos of Franklin Rowe. The match was close, but something felt off. This man seemed younger, fitter, cleaner. Franklin, by 1986, had developed a noticeable stoop and a limp from a spinal condition. This man didn't have it. So, who was he? The mirror had been found, the blood had been confirmed, and still it wasn't over. Not until they answered one final question. What did Linda see just before the wall closed? Because whatever it was, it had never left, and now it wanted out. An impossible discovery. In late August 2001, a structural engineer named Kelsey Knorr was hired to assess the chapel's viability for demolition. It had stood too long, now a magnet for ghost hunters, trespassers, and trouble. She arrived with 2 assistants, both skeptical of the rumors. They began with the foundation scan, standard imaging for voids or decay. But in the basement, under the original floorboards, the scanner registered something strange, pockets of warm air, moving. When the team opened the crawl space and lowered a heat-sensitive camera, they expected animals. Instead, they saw nothing, just slow, pulsing pressure on the infrared, like lungs. Kelsey muttered, "It's breathing." And then they heard the whisper, only once, just behind the wall. Still here. Amanda's final theory, Amanda had become something else. Not just a sister, not just a survivor, a historian, a hunter, a woman haunted by her own reflection. She returned to the chapel alone the night of the equinox, sat in the center aisle with Linda's journal, the locket, and a hammer. She didn't bring a phone, only her voice. "I know you're not dead," she said aloud. "Not all the way." The temperature dropped 5 degrees. The air thickened. Then, from the back of the chapel, the dressing room, a single, deliberate knock. 3 seconds later, another. It was inside the wall again. The final tape. 3 days later, Amanda mailed a box to Detective Leah Hart. Inside, a small voice recorder, the size of a thumb drive, and a note in Amanda's handwriting. "I went to listen. I don't know if I came back." Hart played the recording. For 45 seconds, silence. Then footsteps. Amanda's voice. "Linda, can you hear me? Is this you?" A long pause. Then the softest voice, not Amanda's. "You never heard me." A metallic sound, like nails dragging over wood. Amanda again. "What are you?" Then, clear as crystal, a voice that sounded like Linda, but deeper, slower. "I was left behind." The girl in the reflection. Months passed. Amanda didn't return calls. Her house remained untouched. Neighbors reported lights turning on by themselves at 3 a.m. A child walking past her front window claimed to see a woman in a white dress smiling in the hallway. No one has seen Amanda since November 2nd, on the night of the first frost, Hart's final visit. Detective Hart never solved the case, but on the 20-year anniversary of Linda Carver's disappearance, she returned to the chapel grounds, now overgrown, fenced, and condemned. She brought only one thing, a compact mirror, and for a moment she stared into it. Nothing unusual, until she tilted it slightly and saw a hand, not hers, touching the glass gently from the other side just before the reflection faded. The truth. What happened to Linda Carver was not just violence. It was erasure, not only from life, but from view. She was hidden, sealed, and almost forgotten. Almost. But the dead don't stay buried if they were never properly laid to rest. And the truth. The chapel never stopped breathing. It only held its breath until someone finally listened.